My name is Simon Fox, and I work with my friend Toby Green. We've come here from London, and I'm here to talk to you today about the written world, and that's our social storytelling tool. And I'm excited and a little bit daunted to talk to you about it. And I think daunted, most of all, not least because you are a daunting room full of people to talk to. You're all doing really exciting stuff in your industry, but also because it's not really my industry. I make games and you all make books, and sometimes it feels like we're from fundamentally different worlds. I think there's a cultural and a functional gulf that separates games and books, and a number of persistent attitudes which underpin it. And some of them are attitudes that have really been around for quite a while. People used to believe that the printing press would make us more stupid, by injecting a new susurrus of voices into the cultural commons. People were afraid that reading books would make us lazy and pasty and afraid to go outside. And these are familiar fears today, I think, when we talk about games. I actually think that games and books are fundamentally not as different as we might believe. When you think about the fundamental motivations for reading books, they're actually pretty much the same as the fundamental motivations for playing games. According to some Pew Institute research into reading habits, I think released this year, 26% of the people who read do so to learn, gain knowledge, or discover new information, and the following 15% of people who read do so for the sake of what's called imaginative escapism. These are the two largest groups of readers. If we were to think about the question, what is the fundamental human need that's being addressed by these motivations? We'd say that those people who are reading for the purpose of learning and gaining new information, they're doing so for self-actualization or to grow their self-esteem, to improve themselves as people. And those 15% of people who are reading for the sake of escapism, I think they're actually hitting every point on this pyramid at some point or another. If you're reading an exciting adventure book, then you're doing so to tickle your need for physical security. You want to be excited and then reassured. If you're reading a steamy vampire romance, then you're stimulating your fundamental need for love and affection. And this is very similar to the way that games work. They throw you into a simulated situation and work hard to talk to your fundamental needs. So I think that it's clear to me, at least, that the same things which make books fascinating pieces of media, very much the same things that inspired me to make games at all in the first place, and particularly to make a game like the written world that is so steeped in the culture and form of storytelling. With the written world, we have some core aims, and I think they're similar to the core aims that people who make books have. And we want to tell stories, or give people the tools to tell stories. We want to educate people, and we want to create something which has ideally a measurable positive impact on the world. So, books or written stories have been being told and stored for about 5,000 years now. And I think because of the nature of the medium, we tend to spend a lot of time in written stories with the interior lives of the fundamental characters, learning about how they develop. As a result, books have gained a reputation for delivering deep and nuanced narratives, and a deserved one. Games are more nascent as a storytelling medium. Well, they feel more nascent. Their protagonists tend to be silent foils for players to inhabit, and as a result of this, we tend to focus a little bit more on the actions that they take rather than the sort of their interior thoughts. As a result, I think the stories that get told in games are often perceived as a little bit pulpy. I think the attitude that we get is that books tell great stories, but games tell stories that are fundamentally about explosions. Actually, a guy called Raf Costa, who's a fantastic game designer and something of a personal hero, recently wrote an article where he went as far as to say that narrative is not a game mechanic at all. The story elements in your game are destined to be expensive to produce, short-lived, and ultimately consumed. And I think he's right, but it does perhaps gloss over the fact that narrative is an inevitable consequence of game mechanics, that games are sort of an engine for driving a narrative forward. I think a great example of this is a game called Cotillion. This is currently in production. It's being made by Richard Evans and Emily Short. Emily is a writer, and Richard is an incredibly talented game developer. It's being described as an interactive comedy of errors. It's very much inspired by the social nuances and mores of Jane Austen's era. It's rendered in text, so it feels like a novel, and that allows for a sort of nuance in presentation that's hard to achieve in expensive visual animations. What's really interesting here is that Richard has spent a great deal of time modeling the social affordances of the era that they're investigating. So the result is a set of characters that feel very much more alive and responsive than the characters that we're used to seeing in games. Now, these are characters that will notice if you take a little bit too long to sit down at the dinner table, and they're characters that will notice if you pick the wrong fork, and they might call you out on that. They might change their opinion of you as a result. These characters have interiority, thoughts and feelings that you as a player can choose to respect or to try and contravene. And the result, I think, is a narrative being delivered with a delicacy and nuance that's really great to see in any medium. With the written world, we're taking a different approach to a very similar set of problems. For us, storytelling is fundamentally a social act, and we have two people sit down to play a game and emerge with a cohesive piece of fiction. As a result, we spend a lot of time asking ourselves the question, how do people collaboratively write? How do two people work on the same block of fiction? And we've come up with, a few things that are necessary prerequisites. You need a social space to come to and share, to do it within. You need a shared context, a kind of mythos that is universal to the work that you're doing. And you need clearly defined roles to stop the whole thing from devolving into chaos. So this is the written world. This is our shared context and our social space. And each island here is a story modeled in physical space, and each of the tiles that you can see are a location that can be explored. Actually, this is the story of Little Red Riding Hood modeled in our system. So you can see Granny's house up at the top there, and the woods in the middle where Little Red Riding Hood first meets the wolf. For us, in our system, writing a story and telling a story are very much the same act. And we split that act up into two distinct roles. We have a narrator and a protagonist. We call them the god and the hero of a story. The god is in charge. They control the world and pull the strings behind the scenes. They're responsible for making the world of the story react and adapt to the actions that the hero takes. And the hero is a completely separate character, controlled and created by somebody else and dropped into the story with relatively little information. And this is what a hero sees the first time they enter into a story. And that map and more information becomes uncovered and available to them the more they explore and move through the space and speak with people. And the result is a sort of very intimate and exploratory relationship with the narrative that's emerging. And it works very well. We hope to capture and support a fundamentally playful act, something very similar to the way in which children sit down and create narrative together. It's all about the fun of the process and not so much about worrying about the result. We work very hard to create a system with rules and constraints, but that mostly keeps out of people's way. And we work with Little Red Riding Hood a lot in playtests. It's a story that people know and they really know what to expect from it. But what's really great to see is that once our playtesters begin to grasp what the system can do, always these stories go off in really radically divergent routes. I don't think we've ever had two Little Red Riding Hood stories that were the same. We've had a Little Red Riding Hood who was a sort of effete middle-class business person who was too afraid to go into the woods at all. We've had one who was a hard-boiled noirish detective who suspected from the very beginning some sort of conspiracy between the wolf and the grandmother. I have actually a video here of a game being played. I hope I do. Do I? I did have a video here of a game being played. But YouTube isn't playing dice. Okay, well, what was going to be shown here is a video of a game being played through on a screen that actually looks a lot like this, except from the god side. And from the god side, you see a lot more of the screen. The map is fully visible. And this text on the right-hand side of the page here, this is what we call the meta-narrative. So this is kind of a conversation between the hero and the god, and it consists of the hero character navigating through space and speaking in character, and the god working to make the world adapt to them. And it's really functional. You know, the people that are playing in the video that I was going to show, not only have never spoken about the narrative that they're producing in advance, but they'd never even met, and they still were able to produce a good, strong narrative. We also have, so actually this bold text up at the top, this is what we call the record, and this is kind of a live editing act, so the God player who's in charge of the story can take chunks of the meta text and just place it on the record at any point, and that's what produces, at the end of a play session, a cohesive piece of fiction which reads well. And what's produced at the end of that is this kind of this storybook, and that's stored in a library. And you know, this is our shared mythos. You know, and players can come to the library to find stories that have been completed and read them, or to find a new story to get involved with, or to watch stories that are currently in process. You know, kind of like serials. So books and games both, I think, are fundamentally pedagogic tools. You know, with a game, it's actually impossible to play a game without learning something. A game simulates a space and throws you into a new context and demands that you take action within it in order to gain agency. And that's fundamentally a learning process. Games actually, books, perform a very similar act, but they rely on their reader to do a little bit more of the heavy lifting. Keith Oatley, in his paper from 2008, wrote that readers of fiction undergo a sort of interior simulation of an abstracted social situation. So they take the emotional content of the fiction that they're reading and simulate it in their minds. And this forms an active sort of social practice. So Oatley believed that reading fiction genuinely trained our ability to empathize with other people and respond to social situations. With the written world, we achieve something very similar, or we hope to, but you know, we have the added benefit of this being a live social situation with another human being in a safe context. We've actually tested this in schools. You can see here some people or some kids aged between 7 and 9, working with an earlier prototype of the written world. They'd been learning about the Second World War and had read a book called The Silver Sword, which is about a daring escape from a Nazi prison. And here they were using the characters that they'd been reading about and remixing them and the locations that they'd been learning about into entirely new narratives. It was a real pleasure to see. It was actually an incredibly fun day. And we got some pretty good reviews. These are from the kids. Actually, one of the kids who was playing came up to us and told us this was the best game that she'd ever played. It's flattering. But I think even more compelling is the fact that the teacher who spends every day with these kids told us the work that they were producing with our system was up to the highest standards they were capable of producing. I think that's very exciting. You know, they really did enjoy using the game. They didn't want to leave after the session was over, and even when the break bell rang, you know, we had the sight of kids, you know, desperately trying to finish what they were working on, which was a real joy. So I think it's really hard to argue with the notion that reading is beneficial both for society and for the individual. In the UK, we have actually some reasonably shocking literacy statistics. As many as 1 in 6 people, adults actually, struggle with reading and writing in England, and that means that they have a reading and writing level equal to or less than that of an 11-year-old child. And this despite the fact that we really do know through numerous research projects that people with high literacy levels do better in almost every metric. You know, they tend to live happier lives, they tend to have higher paying jobs, they tend to live in better places. Games have a little bit of a harder time of it in the media. Here's a Daily Mail article arguing that violent video games make people more aggressive. It's a reasonably common argument to hear, and actually surprisingly easy to dispel, but without getting into it too much. There are still fantastic examples of games actually doing real, genuine and measurable socially good things in the world. You might have heard of Foldit. This is a collaboration between the University of Washington's Game Science and Biochemistry department. It tasks players with mimicking the way in which protein structures unfold themselves. It puts humans' inherent spatial reasoning ability to work in the service of biochemical research. And it's also a wickedly difficult puzzle game. And what's really remarkable here is that when people play, they're actually contributing to genuine research projects. Last year, foldit players helped to decipher a protein configuration which had stumped scientists for 15 years. It took them 10 days. You probably haven't heard of dysphoria. This is a trans woman, Anna Anthropy's approach to telling or relating the experience of her journey through hormone replacement therapy. Anna uses simple game mechanics to give us a glimpse into the mindset of someone going through such a difficult thing. It's really hard, I think, to put a concrete value on something like this, either for the audience or for the author. With the written world, we have a few core values that we've been working to. I mentioned earlier this desire to capture and support this kind of playful act. But we also have all around our office in London, design papers and user journeys, and this phrase comes up time and time again, the God-hero friendship. We really have worked to produce something which supports positive relationships growing between the people who play it. For example, I'm thinking of a mechanic that we actually coded, created, tested, sweated over, but had to remove. It was called Force, and it allowed people to collect points as they went through a narrative and use those points to challenge something that they maybe didn't agree with. And it was designed as something to actually resolve conflicts in the flow of a story being told, but we found people were using it a little more competitively rather than collaboratively, and so we removed it. I'm immensely proud to say that we've been working with a charity called Most Mirror, who are a UK and Bosnian charity working to build positive relationships between young people in post-conflict areas in the Prijedor part of Bosnia. They'll be using the written world in the coming year as part of their community and social building activities, and this will allow us to start to collect some of the vital qualitative and quantitative data that will tell us whether we've been successful in producing something which genuinely has a positive impact. I mentioned that this isn't my industry, and that's absolutely true. And viewed from the outside, it can be easy to feel that the publishing industry is a little skittish around new technology and new experiences. From being here for the last couple of days, I know that that is simultaneously very true and very much not true. There are a lot of people who have spoken about ways that are really fascinating when it comes to moving literary experiences forward technologically. And that can only be the best thing to do. According to the Pew research that I quoted earlier, digitally enabled readers are literally the best readers. They're the most frequent readers. They're most likely to be reading right now. They're most likely to have read a book in the past year. Significantly, they're more likely to have paid for the book they're reading than have borrowed it. And it's very clear to me that the people who are growing up playing games right now are the people who will be consuming literature, 5 years, 10 years from now. And those people are consuming games for very much the same reasons that we consume literature. And publishers hold the keys, I think, to very desirable experiences here. They have intellectual properties that people want to learn about, they want to submerge themselves within them, they want to escape into them. And I really look forward to seeing a new generation of products which recognize these fundamental desires and really work to approach people based on them. Thank you very much. I don't know if I have time for questions.